Hello, my name is Gary Keogh. I'm with the USDA's National Agricultural Statistics Service, state statistician for the New England states. Assisting me today is Mr. Nadar Bakadensi from the Ministry of CASPI and Lorenzo Lavanjavi from the Ministry of Agriculture. What we're going to do is show you a video of the objective yield procedures that will be used for collecting information from orchards and using that information to estimate the apple production in Georgia. As an overview of the objective yield survey, we'll be selecting a random sample of Georgian apple producers. From each of these producers, we'll be selecting one orchard. Then within each orchard, we will select 2 trees. And then within each tree, we will select up to 2 count units. Now in these count units, when we do a first visit, we will count the number of fruit that are on the tree. Then on our second visit, which will happen just before harvest, we will count the marketable fruit that has fallen from the tree and collect the weight. Then we will also collect the number of fruit and the weight of the fruit that has remained in the count unit. So with the overview, we're now ready to start, and we'll go with the interviewing of the farmer. We're now at the point where Mr. Nadar has interviewed the farmer, Mr. Georgi, using the Form A. The Form A, we will collect the number of apple orchards the farmer has, and also information about those orchards that we need. That includes items like how big the orchards are, how many rows are in each orchard, and how many trees are in the longest row. Now with using that information in a random number table, we select one of those orchards. Then we will take that information from the Form A and copy it on to the next form that we need to use, and that is the Form B1. And for that, we then need to go to the starting corner of the selected orchard. Before we go into the actual field procedures, just give you an example of some of the materials and equipment that are needed to lay out our count units. First of all, flagging ribbon. Flagging ribbon is used a lot for marking different areas. Other things we'll need, of course, when we harvest fruit, you'll need a bag to put it in. We have stakes for marking areas under the tree, hammer for putting the stakes in, tape, measures, all that's included here. Now, at the starting corner, we want to put a ribbon, something to mark the orchard so that we can find it the next time we want to come back. So Mr. Nadar is marking the starting corner. We're at the first tree of our selected row. Nadar will now tie a ribbon onto this tree and also on the ribbon indicate that this is row 1.
Roman kırdan mı ödedi?
Okay, ready? Okay, now that the tree has been marked, we will now walk into the orchard to locate the selected tree position. The thing to remember with the tree that we select, we will be counting tree positions, and maybe not always trees. If there's a dead tree, we still count that position. If the tree has no fruit, we still count that position. Now in intensive orchards like this, most likely we just may have a dead tree occasionally, but we will count the tree positions, and starting with the tree 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. All right. This was the selected tree. Once we get to the tree, we'll now make some measurements to determine the row spacing. You'll need to take a ribbon, tie it onto the tree, writing on that this is tree 1. We tie the ribbon in a visible location. In this case, we'll tie it higher in the tree. Sometimes in other plantings, larger trees, the trunk's very visible and we'll tie the ribbon in that location. Okay, now we'll get the stake and the measuring tape. We'll measure the distance from the selected tree to the next tree in the direction of travel. And we'll also take a measurement from the trunk of the selected tree over to the next row of trees, also moving in the direction of travel from the starting corner. Notice he places the stake near the center of the tree, measures to the next tree in the direction of travel. Now we've measured the distance between the trees, we now get the distance between the rows. And with that information, we now need to get information about the number of apples that are on our selected tree. For intensive plantings, we'll be counting all of the apples on the tree. Larger trees will be selecting just a portion of the trees, but now we'll be going through some of the procedures that you'll need to use to count the number of apples, especially when you have trees that have lots of apples. Normally what we want to do is break the tree into sections, and normally counting only up to around 50 apples in a section. All right, we're about ready to harvest the apples now. So we're back at our selected tree for the second visit, and this is where we will collect and weigh the marketable fruit that is on the ground and what's up in the tree. So our first part is we need to identify an area under the tree that can be really associated with the tree. And the way we do that is we will measure between the trees again, locate a halfway point between the trees in front and behind, and then also an area that includes the middle of the row, but it will extend from half of one row over to the middle of the next row. The fruit that is on the ground will be gathered. That which can be marketed will be kept, weighed, and counted. And that way we'll get a measure of the marketable fruit that is not on the tree. Once the fruit on the ground has been taken care of, we will harvest all the fruit that is on this tree. Because it's an intensive planting, we're counting all the fruit. We will then harvest it, count it, and weigh it. Okay. Now we'll have Lorenzo and Nadar will demonstrate the procedures for locating the midpoints and then running flagging ribbon around to mark the corners of the all the boundaries of the drop areas, we can call it. Okay. Hello.
Head?
No.
No? He's totally finished?
No.
Second 3 years.
Yeah, it will take another 3 years.
And then section B.
Another garden,
Nothing.
sir? Another garden we go to here, Edison.
Don't know. Don't know. No. What? Okay. Works better if there's two people doing it. No.
Stop.
No, stop.
Touch it.
what we're doing now is locating the corners of the unit and using the ribbon to lay out the boundary. We've moved our stake from near the tree to our first red stake. Draw the ribbon to the corner, and then using the ribbon and eyeballing a right angle using the two media stakes that we had already laid out. The process is repeated then using the stakes that are located in the middle of the row and also the other stake located in the middle of the trees. Okay. But that's not, no, that's not good. That stake doesn't go there. No, let me see this. Gathered all the fruit that was usable, marketable from the drop unit. That fruit is now collected. We put that in a bag and we'll weigh that fruit separate from the fruit that we will harvest from the tree. Okay. $2.2 kilograms.
Orida Rua.
The dropped fruit out of the way, we can now start harvesting all the fruit that's going to be on the intensive planted trees. Suggestion, count the fruit by section, and that way you can verify the count versus what's on the ribbon when you made your first counting on the original B1 form. Put as many sections into a bag as you feel necessary. Important, we need to know the exact number of fruit and the weight because that impacts every other sample and an estimate of the average weight of the apples for this particular year in Georgia. Also, make sure everyone double counts, and that that pretty much covers the field procedures for the apple objective yield survey. Now that we have located the starting corner, we will next select 2 rows and then 2 trees, or 1 tree within each of those rows. We've done this with the random number table. The first row we've selected is row 5. The second row that was selected was row 10. In addition, we've selected the 20th tree in row 1, the 5th tree in our second row. Now we will count out the rows to get to what we have called row 1. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Counted all the fruit on the tree. We've tagged or placed ribbons in the locations with the fruit count on. The next step, and we've also done this twice. Each person counts and verifies the the fruit count. Once this is done, the number of fruit is recorded on the B1s. On the B1, there's locations to record separate sections. When that is completed, we're ready to move on to the next tree. The important thing to remember, we had the drop fruit. Drop fruit will be included even on our first visit because each of these trees represents several other trees. Yes, there was a mistake made on that dropping of the fruit, but we don't modify our fruit count just because that one fruit came off. That fruit will be included in our B1 counts. Okay. This has concluded the field work for our first tree. Next step will be go to the location for the second tree, locate it, mark it out just like we've done here. So this concludes the portion of how to do the data collection for the first visit for intensive planted orchards. We've laid out the ribbon to mark the borders of our drop area where we will count the marketable fruit. So first, we need to know just what is marketable. And for that, Mr. Nadar will explain how to determine which of the fruits that are in the drop unit you will be counting and weighing. Mr. Nadar.
არ ვარგა და ეს უნდა გადავდოთ ცალკე. არ ვიღებ და დანარჩენს უკვე დავიწყებთ რომლებიც საბაზრეთ და მრეწველობისთვის გამოდგება, დავიწყებთ მის შეგროვებას.
Okay. Now, what he's doing is picking up the fruit that is not on the border. All that will get counted. Now, what we also have to include or take into account is that the border area of the unit can be associated with up to 1, 2, 3, 4 other trees. So what we do is that we will only count fruit that happens to be on our borders for the 2 borders that are closest to the starting corner. In this case, in every example, the front border, that fruit is counted. In our case, the fruit in that corner, on that border, will also be counted. But this one, this border, and the back border, we will not count that fruit.
Ոչաչը ֆերմերից ջիբեր։ Այո։ Վերատ վար գամի քիլდა, ներები դամաճկի։ Օխրանից պրոգրամազել վար գամի։
Ոչա սուդատ գաքսա։ Սերիոզուրա դարոմը կացկացის ვაშսკეთ და იცინი კადრში ჩა։
ეხლა წესით ამერიკას հանუამე ხმარა։
სუდა მადლიერი საფე
აჰა, შო. აუ წონოთ ეხლა ესა.
გამოჩნდეს რომ საკროფილი ხეზე ვაშლება. ეს რომ ჩანდეს და პირდაპირ სულეთია კადრში და რო წონიან და всё. იწენ. შემოატრევი.
5 და 20.
აჰა.
5 და 200. აჰა ძმა. ესა.
Usually best to start at the bottom of the tree. And you can feel the way up the trunk till you get to the first limb. Then it's very important to try to touch each of the smaller limbs. And in this case, keep moving out, then I come to this one, I come to one fruit, and this is where it's important to keep touching, because I could have mistakenly counted this fruit too. It's not on the limb. Actually, there's no other fruit out there. So we have one. Bring my hand back down on this one. There's no. Come back. Next limb, we have our second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, out. This one goes 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, oops, 12, 13. We need to count the fruit even if we drop it. And we mark on our ribbon the number of fruit, and I'm going to include a note here that one drop then tie this on our limb. Now you can count one limb at a time. If there's a small number of fruit, you can add multiple limbs together. Usually as you get more experience, you can start adding limbs together. But for starters, recommend going one limb at a time. Hello again. What we're going to show you this time is procedures that we use when we have bigger trees. We've interviewed the farmer, randomly selected an orchard, selected the rows, the trees, everything just as before. And in this case, we've selected this tree to be our tree 1. Now with larger trees, as we showed in our previous section with the intensive planting trees, yes, we could count all the apples, harvest them, but that can take a lot of time. But there's a way we can lower the amount of time spent and labor in the orchard by taking some characteristics of the tree. Our goal in these cases is we want to represent 10% of the live canopy. Collect the apples so that each piece we get around 10%. What we're going to do is use the idea that each limb really supports a certain amount of the canopy. The larger the limb, the larger the canopy. So what we're going to end up doing is we're going to do what we call a random path selection using a random number table and measuring the size of the various limbs at different divisions. We usually start our measurements at what we call the first stage, which is going to be down here at the trunk. And then using the random number table, cumulative cross-sectional area, select limbs to locate 2 count units within the tree. The measurement, as I mentioned, is called the cross-sectional area. And what we use is a tape that's specially calibrated to not measure the circumference, but it's found that bigger circumference it's more correlated with the canopy. So the cross-sectional area, think if you cut this limb off, the area of exposed wood is the cross-sectional area. So the tape is, we get to the tree, we mark the limbs, and usually we'll label them 1, 2, 3, starting from the lowest and working up. So, all right. Then to make the measurement, we just take the tape, put it in smooth wood, smooth bark, bring it together. And in this case, this section measures about 128 square centimeters. Our number 2 and 5 square centimeters. And the third, 150 square centimeters. These numbers are recorded on the B1 and accumulated, and the total accumulated, okay, 480 is the sum of the square centimeters for the 3 limbs. Then using a random number table, one of those limbs will be selected. And the random number
is 179.
179. So that means this limb is where we will use to continue our measurements until we reach an area of the tree that has, 5% of the accumulated CSA, which in our case was 486. So we want,
We need
no, this one.
second one.
5% of the accumulated 486.
It's about 2 point.
About 25. Okay. So, all right. Now, we'll measure the next division, and that would be need to mark these 2 limbs, because this is where it divides next. And we'll mark 1 as the lowest. So I'll allow you gentlemen to, we need to mark the unit first. Mark the limb first. All right. One thing to consider when making measurements, especially in the second and third stages, is areas that have already been pruned. For example, on this limb, yes, we could have made the measurement here, but this area here is really developed to support limbs that were here, here, and then you can see other pruning marks. So what you do is you don't measure down here, you measure farther up to get above the areas that have been pruned. So,
Bir süre sonra kurmasını yapalım.
all right. So what we've done is selected a random number. It has indicated that this is the path that we're going to take. Now, the first division of wood is actually at this small limb. This limb doesn't meet our 5% requirement to be a count unit on its own. So what we'll do instead is we will measure this limb, but its measurement will also be included with the next limb above its measurement. So when it comes to doing the random number selection, these two limbs will be part of the same number. So we'll make this measurement, about this area, no major pruning until you actually at all on this limb. So we'll make a measurement about here, then here, this one will need to get above this lump. Right up here it starts to develop again. So that's 5 centimeters. We'll add that to this measurement. Yeah. 33. So on the B1 form for the measurement, you will record 33 plus 5. And then measurement for the other limb. Yes. 2. That's 2 though. Very good. 1. Combination of this limb and the smaller limb were selected. So to indicate that if to do any further measurements, we need to tie a ribbon that will take us from this small limb up to the larger limb here. Okay, so tie it. Well, tie it up. No. Yeah. You need to tie it from here. Like that. You tie it to connect the two. If you explain that. You're connecting the two limbs.
Oraya lütfen daha kalkıyor. Tam üstte kadar.
Combination limb was selected. So to indicate that the two limbs are connected, part of the same measurement, tying a ribbon that connects the lower limb to the upper limb that it is associated with. Okay. This is the limb that has been selected. Now, remember back when I said we look for 5%, a unit, count unit, to be 5% of the tree canopy. However, if we look at how this limb develops further out, it really doesn't allow us to divide it into any smaller limbs. our total CSA at this point was 486, which means our target for a 5% CSA is around 24. And we're at roughly 57, 58 now.
This one is 38.
So we could divide it if there were other branching, but since there's none, in this case we're going to just stop here with the path measurement, and we will end up counting all the fruit, including the fruit that's on our smaller limb, and this will be our count unit. Okay. Okay, if this is 52 square centimeters is our measurement. Our target measurement is about 24. We can now measure these two limbs, and if one of them is under, it looks like they will be under or around the 24 centimeter mark, so we'll probably be stopping at this point. So we'll make the measurement for these limbs. Remember, we get out past any major pruning, and we'll label them. The lowest one's marked 1, the upper one here will be marked 2. So, past the pruning marks. Well, notice we have a branch here, so we would measure before that.
This was one.
Okay. This was the path that was selected.
Can you start again?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, we've used the random number table again. This is the limb that was selected. It is also 25 centimeters, which is right around our target number of 24 centimeters. So from here out, we will have roughly 5% of the CSA for the for our cumulative CSA at the base. So we can stop our measurements here, mark the limb with the flagging ribbon, and count the fruit that is on the limb from this point to the end of the limb. And this will be the final part for our for this tree. Now, just the last. We've returned to the tree for the second visit. As you can see, we've laid out the drop unit just as we did with our previous. Same basic technique, middle of the row, middle of the tree. The apples will be sorted based on what's marketable, what's not. What is marketable will be gathered and weighed. The tree, the units, they're marked. We've got counts from the first visit. Each count unit will be measured, fruit counted, weighed separately, unit 1, unit 2. Once that's done, we've finished our data collection part, but what's really also important is that we will need to remove all the ribbons, stakes. We need to make the orchard look like we haven't been here. And that pretty much concludes the field work for the objective yield survey. So hopefully you get an idea of the steps that are involved and how they all fit together. Remember, we start with a list of the farmers. With that list, we get their total acres of apples. We then can select random orchards. We know their acres. We can know how many other acres that they account for. Randomly select each orchard. Then within the orchard, we randomly select 2 trees. Counts on the trees, they're based on the probability of selection, usually based on the size of the limb. That's really the techniques that we're looking at. Being able to take measurements that can be repeated. Each enumerator can really do the same procedure and always come up with the same numbers. That's why this is called an objective yield. There's no subjectivity based on, well, I think this is a good tree, this is a good orchard. We know the probability of selection for each component along the way. So that allows us to give a estimate but also to give a confidence interval around that estimate. How confident are we in that estimate? And that's really a summary of the objective yield procedures that we'll be using and how we'll be trying to estimate the Georgian apple crop. Thank you.